Now, this young man has lost everything earthly. He's lost his money, he's lost his pride, he's lost his family. But the one thing he still has is his father's love. So he decides, after living this very, very lowly life, that even his father's hired men, his father's servants, are living better than him. So whatever status the servants are at, his previous status was much, much higher than that. And so now he's below his father's hired men. And he decides, this is crazy. I've got to go home. And so he goes home. That's the normal thing to do. If we were destitute, we had an opportunity to go somewhere where someone would pay for it and take care of us, wouldn't we do that? Yes. I did. And so in this situation, he's very, very desperate. And so he does what desperate people do, and he went home. He has a rehearsed apology. He's got a really well-rehearsed apology, and that is, let's read that. The son said, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he doesn't think it's even possible for him to be where he was before. He doesn't even have aspirations of that. He just wants to be back there, back somewhere where he knows he can have at least the minimal standard of living that he'd seen. And so he's willing to do that. And so he sets out and he's going back to his father with this in mind. He has no aspirations. He knows that everything he did was so awful that it wouldn't make sense for his father to forgive him. That he should try to be happy just being one of his father's hired men. And so he goes back with this in mind, and he tries to just be one of his father's hired men. Now imagine the father during all of this. The father lost a lot. He essentially lost a son. His son said that the father was dead to him when he asked for all these things. So their relationship had been severed. The son had gone off and was doing everything he was doing, but the father has not forgotten about the son. Imagine him sitting up in his recliner every night until way late, falling asleep with the TV on in front of him every night. And every time he hears something rustling in the field, he looks out and he expects to see his son, but it's just a bird. And so he's going through this agony day after day after day after day, but he never gives up looking for his son to come home. Now, in contrast to this story, there's a Buddhist story about pretty much a similar situation. So a son leaves his father, and he goes out, and the son becomes destitute. And the father finds the son. And when he finds his son, the son has forgotten what the father looks like. It's been so long, and they look so different. And so the son has forgotten what the father looks like, and he says, Sir, can I do anything to work for you? And he says, yeah, I'll let you come work for me. And in this case, the father never tells the son that he's his son until after he's worked his way up. He had to earn the love back. Now let's jump back to the prodigal son. When he comes home, his father sees him from a long way off. He hasn't forgotten what his son looks like. He remembers his son, and he knows it's his son coming up the way. And so he runs out there, and they greet his son. The son is probably shocked. It's like winning one of those millionth customer things. You walk in the food line, and you're the 1 millionth customer, and they give you all this fancy stuff. And so that's where he is, because he doesn't just come back to where he was. He comes back even better. The father is elated to have his child back. And so they get a robe, and they get sandals for him, and they put a ring on his finger. So that's the greatest symbol of knowing that you're connected to the household. The ring on your finger is your connection to the household. So he's reconnected to the household. And so he didn't have to earn his father's love back. The father was waiting for him to come back. The father was waiting for him to do the right thing, and the father never gave up on him. He knew that his son had done some shameful things. So imagine this son coming up to his father and trying to go through this rehearsed apology, and the father just embraces his son and says, I know, it's all right. And the shame, the greatest shame any Jew could ever know, the father forgives. In many households, he would have been rejected. He would have been sent back, not only for all that he'd done to his father, but for the shame he'd endured as a Jew. But his father takes him back, and he loves him like he'd never left. And he loves him even more than when he left. And the story, the real story here, is that there's nothing you can do. There's nothing too big. There's nothing too bad. There's nothing too dirty. There's nothing too low that you can do to make God stop loving you. That no matter what you do, God is always going to love you. Now, as we go on a little bit further, we have started the party. The son is home. The party has started, but the older brother finds out about this, and he is very, very upset because he's the one who's been faithful. He's the one who's always been there. He's been a loyal servant to his father. He's done everything his father asked. He managed the business. He picks his father up. He goes to the grocery store for him. He's the one who's been doing all that. And he is very upset that this younger brother, the one who had thrown all of this off to go run wild, is back, and they're having a party for him. Now, in this situation, the older brother is very much like the church sometimes. The older brother is always faithful, always there every Sunday, sits on the front pew, puts his money in every week, is at everything going on in the church all the time. That's the older brother. That's him. And then someone new walks in. And he is offended by that. Lots of times, churches, not this church, the churches are offended when new people come to Christ. Churches are offended. Who are they to sit in my church? Who are they to sit in my seat? When that's really not the point at all. Because the Father says this in the 31st verse, my son, the Father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. We, as a church, must celebrate this. This was the Father's last request in the story. So he's gotten one son back, he almost lost another, but he pulls him back real quick before that happens again. And he says, son, we have to celebrate every time that someone who is lost becomes found. We have to celebrate every time that someone who was living in sin wants to get right with God. We have to celebrate each of those opportunities. And as a church, as the church, we must celebrate that. We can't get caught up in what they did or why. We will never understand the depth of God's grace. If he can save you, he'll save somebody else too. And so if you think about, take 5 seconds, think about every bad thing you've ever done. That's nasty, isn't it? Now think about that, and if he could forgive that and make you his child, can he do it for everyone? So that's the story. This Father's Day message is not about how the Son sees the Father, but how the Father sees the Son. Even in his imperfection, even in his sin, he still loves him. Because there's nothing that can keep you from God's love.
Amen. Amen.